As Uganda comes under deadly attack, fingers point to Islamist fighters in Somalia. So, is Uganda paying the price for its peacekeeping mission in this war-torn country? And is the violence of Somalia spreading? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. 1 minute they were just enjoying the World Cup final, celebrating the final stages of this great global event. The next they were caught up in a deadly massacre. 2 coordinated bombs going off at 2 locations in the Ugandan capital of Kampala. One at an Ethiopian restaurant and the other at a rugby club, both filled with crowds gathered to watch the game. At least 64 people were killed and scores more injured. Ugandan authorities believe Somalia's al-Shahab group is behind the attacks. Stephanie Decker explains why.
Ugandan police say their suspicions of who is to blame lie mainly across its border with these men. Al-Shahab, a well-organised group of Islamist fighters who've been fighting the Somali government for the past few years. So why would they pose a threat to Uganda? Somalia's government is being propped up by a force of African Union troops, with Uganda contributing just over half of those soldiers. The AU troops are engaged in almost daily battles with al-Shahab. It's led to a string of threats against not only African Union troops within Somalia, but also specifically at Uganda and other contributing countries. Just a few days ago, a senior al-Shahab leader called for fighters to attack the embassies of Uganda and Burundi worldwide. Direct threats were also levelled against the people of Uganda, al-Shahab holding them accountable for the AU's actions against the people of Mogadishu. Then there's the Ethiopian connection. One of the targets in Kampala was an Ethiopian restaurant where people were watching the World Cup final, something al-Shahab banned at home. Football is forbidden to watch or to play. Ethiopia is no favourite with al-Shahab. Its troops invaded in 2006 to back the then interim government to fight the Union of Islamic Courts, from which al-Shahab formed. Ethiopian troops managed to temporarily disperse the courts, finally withdrawing its troops in 2009. So the grudges and the threats are there, but no confirmation that al-Shahab is behind it. The group has carried out suicide bombings before, but all within Somalia, never outside its borders. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera.
Well, joining me to take on this subject in Nairobi, Obonyo Olweni, who's the former spokesperson for the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA. In London, Roger Middleton, consultant researcher to Chatham House's Africa programme. And in Doha, we have Afyari Elmi, who's an expert on Somalia and a professor of international politics at Qatar University. Welcome, gentlemen, to you all. Afyari, if I could start with you, first of all indications are that al-Shahab are responsible. They haven't yet claimed responsibility at this stage. If so, they represent the first foreign strike attacks outside Somalia, and it presents a new threatening tactic, doesn't it?
Well, let me first begin that this is not actually something that can be tolerated. Killing innocent people for political aim, regardless of which group that does, or whatever motivation is, whether legitimate or illegitimate, is not acceptable. And I definitely condemn this barbaric act, or criminal, attack. That I definitely wanted to make clear first. Second, I think we should not jump into conclusions at this stage. The Ugandan authorities is still investigating the attacks and who were behind. There are all kinds of potential likely suspects that might be looked at. Some domestic, some not domestic, and some al-Shahab, of course. And obviously, the al-Shahab, the indication is that are directing to al-Shahab is basically based on 2 things. First, the al-Shahab leader issued a threat against Uganda and Burundi. And then the second one is that Ugandan forces are in Mogadishu battling al-Shabaab forces on daily basis. I think these are the 2 indications that are being used at the moment. But we have to wait and see until either al-Shabaab claims or the Ugandan authority concludes its investigation.
I understand. Now, let me put that to Roger Middleton then. Roger, all countries, if it is al-Shabaab, all countries who contribute to the African Union presence in Somalia, in that case, they would have a big reason to worry, wouldn't they?
Well, I mean, al-Shabaab have made these threats against Uganda, against Burundi as well, who are the other people providing troops for the AU force on several times over the last few years. So it's nothing new, the threat being made, but it is new, the action being carried out. And of course, bear in mind, they've also made threats against neighbouring states, Ethiopia and Kenya, who they accuse of meddling in the affairs of Somalia. But this really is, if it is Shabaab, and of course we must qualify this, we don't know for sure, although it certainly bears the hallmarks of a Shabaab attack, the use of a suicide bomber potentially, and the target as well, as has been explained. But if it is a Shabaab attack, it does mark a new stage in this battle. And I think it probably tells us some interesting things about the struggle within Shabaab between those who are committed to a more internationalist, a more international jihad agenda, and those who have an Islamist, certainly, but more of a nationalistic objective in their activities.
Okay, Abonyo Olweni, it's possible, of course, that it isn't al-Shabaab, and it's said that groups like the Lord's Resistance Army, who you have represented, and the ADF have been threatening direct action. Is this something that the LRA would support?
Let me begin by, first of all, saying that we're very sad about the loss of lives in Kampala, but not only in Kampala. We are sad about the loss of lives in the last 24 years in the whole of this region, in Uganda, in Sudan, in Somalia, in Mogadishu in particular, in DR Congo. In this particular incident of Kampala, the LRA is completely not to blame. The LRA does not carry out its war in that way. Certainly there are many anti-government of Uganda elements operating in the region, but most prominently in the recent days, in the recent past, are the elements in Somalia. So it is only a matter of speculation. If it is, we are certain that if in the future we'll know that it is these elements in Somalia that have caused this bloodshed in Kampala, then we should look at the root causes of the problems. We shall identify that the government of Uganda has been part of the conflict propagation wars in this region, in the whole of the Great Lakes region, including Uganda, Somalia, Sudan, and DR Congo. And at the root of all these wars and conflicts is resource dispossession of the people of this region. In particular, it is known that in Somalia there is oil, in Uganda there is oil, in Sudan there is oil, and in DRC there is oil. And so it is the government of Uganda which is ultimately to blame for all this loss of life in this region.
Okay, well, let me put this to Afiari Elmi. Afiari, what do you make of that? And do you feel that if it is al-Shabaab, that such action, like we've seen in Kampala, the deadly strikes that they've carried out, do you feel that such action is likely to encourage the Ugandan government to pull out of Somalia, or would it just, I don't know, stiffen its resolve?
Well, I don't think so. Even if this comes to that conclusion that al-Shabaab was after, I believe it will have the opposite effect, which is it will actually invoke sort of an interventionist mood in which not only Uganda but the international community and the regional countries will actually argue that they will have to fight al-Shabaab in Somalia. So we'll be seeing more of, interventions if this comes to the, or at least if the attack is behind, if al-Shabaab is behind the attack, then we will be expecting more of an interventionist activities rather than Uganda pulling back. So I just wanted to add 2 points, though. The first is that I'm sure that the region will be interested, and they issued a communique in which they said that they will be intervening in Somalia and they will be sending troops to Somalia. And I hope that at least the region and the international community as a whole do not commit the mistake that they committed in 2006, in which they have sent Ethiopia to Somalia. That intervention and that invasion actually emboldened al-Shabaab and created a popular support or popular cause for them. I hope that they don't do that mistake again, and at least recognize there are sensitivities when it comes to Ethiopia that Somali people in general have some legitimate grievances against the state.
Okay, let me bring in Roger Middleton. Let me bring in Roger Middleton. I've got to share it about, because we haven't got that much time on this program and we need everybody to have a voice. So, Roger, what's your view on this?
I quite agree. I mean, there is a real danger of this being used as an excuse to further some kind of a interventionist agenda in Somalia. Now, what we've seen over the course of the last 20 years since the collapse of the Somali state has been a series of failed military interventions from outside. That goes back to the UN and the United States in the early 1990s, and we remember how that ended, and of course Black Hawk Down is the example of that. But the Ethiopian intervention, which we've talked about already today in 2006, that was really the spark point around which Shabab were able to organize themselves to raise funds, to raise support, and to recruit young people to fight for them. And it's really when they went from being a small militia, really, under the control of more moderate elements within the broader Islamist community in Somalia, to being their own very radical organization with their ability to really control most of the southern part of the country on their own. So I think the international community, and it is the international community who need to be concerned about this, not just the region, but the international community need to think very carefully about their response to this. And hopefully it will be a response which is a bit more nuanced than simply sending in troops into Somalia, which are often sent in insufficient numbers as well if you're going to do this.
Okay, well, let's see precisely what we know about al-Shahab. The group is an offshoot of the deposed Islamic Courts Union that controlled much of central and southern Somalia till late 2006, and that's when a UN-backed interim government overthrew them. Al-Shahab is believed to be the largest insurgent group fighting the transitional government, and they want to impose a strict version of Sharia law in Somalia. They also want all foreign troops and peacekeepers to leave, refusing to engage in any peace process, and they have admitted links to al-Qaeda. Let me bring in Abonyo Alweni. To what degree are al-Shabaab part of al-Qaeda? Do they act independently, or is their tune called from afar, as it were?
I'll go back first before I answer your question that if it is proved out that al-Shabaab is responsible for the incident in Kampala, this will not provoke the government of Uganda to pull out its forces from Mogadishu, because the government of Uganda is part of this whole program of dispossession wars which is going on in Somalia, in Sudan, and as I've mentioned earlier, in the other parts of the Great Lakes region. And this is because President Yoweri Museveni is insensitive to the feelings of the people of Uganda, the people of Somalia, and the people of Africa in general. He is only answerable to the West. Coming back to the issue of al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab and other forces in Somalia are simply a creation of the West in terms of extremism, because it is a necessary case to carry out, to prosecute this war of propagation. This is what we have identified. We have established in our document here that the people of Somalia have been divided and have been made to fight as part of this propagation scheme of the wars going on. And therefore, this conflict is not going to end soon. Al-Shabaab is just an offshoot of all these elements.
So you're saying that they're not an offshoot of al-Qaeda per se?
I cannot establish that they are an offshoot of al-Qaeda, but I believe that it is the people of Somalia who are reacting to all these years of dispossession, of all these years of conflicts and wars. They are trying to assert themselves to come up and take control of their country. They are fighting for their survival. They are fighting for their own people.
Okay. Afiare Elmi, do al-Shabaab have the wholesale, widespread support of the people of Somalia?
Well, I don't believe that, but let me just say a few words about al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is not a monolithic group. It's a heterogeneous group in which consists of both domestic people with domestic agenda and those with globalist agenda. So that we have to understand that. Depending on which one is dominant, always is determined by the conditions that they are at. And there are arguments that say that the global jihadist group is now dominating the al-Shabaab movement. But what we have to, first of all, look this in perspective and deal with the issues comprehensively. I think sending more forces perhaps will help in the short term, but what needs to be done is creating inclusive, professional, and disciplined force. Is Somali force in particular in the country, which can deal with extremism and organized crime and violence and all kinds of things. I think this is what is needed. The international community is overlooking these realities. There are already like 10 years lost of missed opportunities, that whenever an international conference is organized, they always look to the outside and send forces, whether it's from the region or outside. I think these are needed, but what is needed more is creation of a professional and inclusive Somali force.
Okay.
If the statelessness is to be removed from the equation.
All right, Roger Middleton, it's fair to say that peacekeeping is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Because many would question the efficacy of the success of that mission when you've got soldiers dying in Somalia and now people dying at home too.
I mean, it's absolutely right what you say. I mean, the AMISOM forces, the AU forces in Mogadishu, they're not really peacekeeping. They're protecting the government from a very effective and strong insurgency against them. And if the AMISOM forces, the Ugandans and the Burundians, were to leave tomorrow, it's very unlikely that the government would survive for very long at all. So they're there, you know, life support essentially for that government. And without them, there would be no international government. I think if we're looking at Somalia, it's important to remember that this is a country which, like others have spoken about, you know, this is a country which is not just the disaster story we see in Mogadishu and in the south of the country. If we look at Somaliland in the northwest of the country, this is a place which has just held democratic elections and had a transfer of power from one president to another, better than many of its neighbours, if we're frank about it. So there are Somali-based solutions to the problems that the countries face. If we look at the Islamic Courts Union back in 2006, many Somalis you talk to now will say, actually, that was the best time to go to Mogadishu in the last 20 years. You could walk around the streets, you could go to the hospital, it was peaceful and safe. So the kind of solutions which Somalia needs have to come from within Somalia. They have to come from Somalis themselves. They have to be acceptable to the local population. And there's been a real problem, I think, over the last 20 years, since the collapse of the state, with externally designed and externally imposed solutions to Somalia's problems. And they really haven't worked, and it probably has contributed to the violence that we've seen over all this time.
Okay, Obiano Alweni, what would you have happen? You've been pointing your finger very much at the West.
We'll agree that the solution to the problem of Somalia should come from the people of Somalia themselves. But will they be allowed to be free to solve their own problem? For as long as the war in Somalia is being fought for control of the resources, in particular the oil, which the West wants, then we see that the people of Somalia will not be allowed to solve their own problems. Instead, surrogate armies like the AMISOM forces of Uganda and Burundi, which are there defending a small government which is ineffective, the solution will not come from the people of Somalia. But as long as the resources exist in Somalia, the war will continue. So am I being pessimistic? What I'm saying is this, that the people of Somalia should realize that they are being used, they're being divided and being made to fight each other simply because the West, the international community, wants to take control of the resources of the region of Somalia, just like in other parts of the Great Lakes region of Uganda, Sudan, and DR Congo.
Okay, let's put that
and so the solution to the problem will not come from this imposed force.
All right, let's put that to Afiari Elmi. The people of Somalia are being used.
Well, actually, the way I conceptualize this is totally different. I think the sources of the problem in general is the statelessness in the country. And if anybody is to deal with that, the best solution is to establish a Somali state, which is a Somali-owned and Somali-operated and Somali-defended. And I think that's achievable within. But that does not mean that Somalia can just avoid the international community or the region. Somalis do need, I am Somali, and I'm sure that we need the help of the international community and everybody who wants to help us within that direction of establishing a state. What the problems are is that so far what the externally, externally based initiatives we're generally focusing on short-termism and basically dealing with the symptoms of the problem rather than the root cause of the problem. And I think whether it's Uganda or any other country, eventually this, the way it's looking for now is that it will invoke an interventionist mood. And I think we have to be careful in the way this actually is implemented. And I hope that the world community will not repeat the mistakes in the 2006, and now we will learn from that and obviously focus on how the Somali state can be established. And there are many ways in which it can be established.
But Roger Middleton, just coming back to these attacks in Kampala, do you feel that this may just be a one-off, or is it something that we're going to see more of now?
I don't know. I mean, it's a fool's game to predict these kind of things. I think certainly Shabab have been making these noises for some time, and if this turns out to have been Shabab, who knows if they'll try again. The problem with these kind of attacks, of course, is they're very hard to defend against. You know, it can just be a lone person or two crossing the border, and it's very hard to stop. Hopefully this is a one-off event, but having seen the evolution of the conflict in Somalia and the evolution of the tactics of Shabab, the adoption of things like improvised explosive devices, the adoption of suicide bombing as a tactic, it's hard to see it going in a particularly positive direction.
And Mr. Obonya, how do you see it? Are we going to see more of this kind of attack happening?
We see it this way, that this is simply a provocation, a reaction to the provocation by the presence of foreign forces in Somalia. In particular, the people of Uganda are being made to pay a heavy price in terms of loss of life because of the actions of the forces of Uganda in Somalia. We hope that this is the end to this, and the government of Uganda will be called upon to pull out its forces from Somalia and leave the Somalians to solve their own problems. But we believe that as long as the Amazon forces are there killing the people of Somalia, then the people of Somalia are being provoked, and we fear, God forbid, that such occurrence may still happen in the future. But we hope that the government of Uganda and all other foreign forces in Somalia do pull out and leave the people of Somalia to settle their own problems peacefully and democratically.
Something else that we have to factor in, which is the Ugandan elections, which are upcoming, but that's a subject for another Inside Story. We're beaten by the clock on this one. We're done. Afiari Elmi, Roger Middleton, Obonya Olweni, thanks very much indeed for your perspectives on this. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Inside Story at aljazeera.net. That's our email address. Just drop us a line. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye.